Inspector. Everyone, all the participants are present and we are now live.
That's marvellous. Thank you very much, Mr. Franklin. Okay, it is now 9 o'clock, and so I resume the hearings. Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome. Yeah, so simply as before, please, if you can have your cameras switched on, unless you don't want to be seen, and please keep your microphones off, apart from when you are contributing to the discussion. I'd be grateful for that, thank you. And yeah, as previously, if you could use the Zoom raise hand facility when you want to get into the discussion, and I'll bring you at an appropriate point. So matter 28 then, the main modifications put forward by the council relating to biodiversity. Yeah, my aim here is a relatively simple one, and that is to make sure that policies SP12 and NEX are right, and that by and large is to say that they are consistent with national policy and are effective in that respect. So yes, just so that we're all absolutely sure, we should be looking, I think, at the versions of those two policies set out in ED 176. As a starting point, yes, Mr. Smith's nodding his head, which is a point that I need to pick up on in the wash-up session, actually, about how we deal with main modification numbering and stuff like that. So there's no confusion, but yeah, so that is where we should be looking. So yeah, I set out in my letter, I think it was in August last year, some concerns about this, and the council responded and proposed through ED 176 some additional modifications to policy SP12 and NEX. So I have to say, in terms of my question A, from where we were prior to that modification, it was clear to me that something needed to be done, because those policies weren't, frankly, quite right, and weren't sound in that respect. So in terms of what we're looking at now, then I wonder, it might just help perhaps, Mr. Smith, if you take us through the modifications that you have most latterly proposed, i.e. through ED 176, and just explain the reasoning behind those.
Certainly I can. From having read the statements as well, there's obviously a few points in there that the council would sort of like to pick up on, and it might just sort of help us cut to the chase if I do that as we go through, because clearly, although in our mind what we put in was effective, from reading the statements, they've been interpreted differently, which would tend to suggest perhaps they're not as effective as they might be. So particularly on issues around the dephrometric construction impacts and buffers, which we picked out from the statements, we've sort of had a further look at those, and if I pick those up as I run through, if that's okay.
Please do, yeah, I'd be grateful for that.
Okay, so taking them in turn, if we go to sort of SP12 first and the change there that's relevant, the issue we picked up in NE6, the main mods version of NE6, was this issue around sort of non-designated sites and making sure they're given a proportionate level of protection, because obviously you have international, national, local designations, but obviously the vast majority of the district, or indeed any district, isn't subject to any particular designation, yet still has important features of ecology, biodiversity that need to be taken into account. So in order to better help frame NEX, we've added that criterion D into SP12. So non-designated sites now sit as a kind of fourth point in that hierarchy.
Yeah.
And I think that's about all there is to say on SP12 at this point, in the sense that then having set up that 4-stage hierarchy, it makes it a lot easier to frame or reframe NEX, the biodiversity and geological sites policy.
Yeah. Okay. So, and that 4-stage hierarchy, you say, is consistent with the NPPF at paragraphs 30. Well, there are a couple of paragraphs, aren't there, actually? But it starts at paragraph 113.
That's right. So, as you say, 113 talks about setting criteria-based policies, distinctions made between hierarchy of sites, and obviously international sites at the top, national designations such as SSSIs, and then coming down to local nature reserves, district wildlife sites, and so on. So I think in and of itself, that change to SP12 just makes those points clear and sets them out in order. And that then provides the framework, if you like, for the opening part of NE6 that we're now suggesting. Well, obviously, the additional text that we proposed is in red.
Sorry, did you say NE6?
No, X, sorry.
Thank you, yeah, okay. Yes. I thought I'd missed something significant for a moment.
Yes, it's an X at the moment, because obviously until we've sort of got all the final mods, we will then renumber the plan accordingly at the end of the process. So if we turn to NEX, then, as I say, the red text is what we've then added. And obviously to struck through is what we've taken out. So previously, you can see from the first strikeout, it was framed as affecting designated sites, whereas we've now turned that around to appropriately protect, enhance, manage biodiversity in accordance with the hierarchy and status of designations and features listed in SP12. So obviously now that refers back to that 4-stage hierarchy.
So just in terms of effectiveness, then that gives you that clear link.
Yeah. Exactly. Between the two, and then that final sentence of the kind of opening part of NEX says applicants should, having regard to the status of any affected sites, which again links back to MPPF 113, effectively says interprets the following criteria having regard to the status of what you're looking at as set out, against the hierarchy in SP12. So I think the setup is fine and effective. So then if we roll through the criteria.
You mean when you say the setup, you mean the sort of the policy structuring and operation?
Yes, of the setup in the opening paragraph of NEX now I think is more effective, because there's a clear link to the hierarchy. There's text regarding the reader, the decision maker, to have regard to the status of the site in interpreting the following criteria, and obviously applying them proportionately depending what is affected in that particular instance. So criterion A, we haven't changed around ecological surveys, again, commensurate to the scale and location of development. So that allows for proportionate interpretation. Criterion B, over the page, we've just removed the words their status and in recognition of, again, going back to SP12, we now have non-designated sites included in the consideration. So obviously some of the things we're looking at don't have a status per se. They're not a wildlife site or a SSSI. They're just important ecological features. And the criteria beneath that are unchanged. On C, and I think this is the first point where we might depart from what you've got in front of you, you can see there that we proposed stripping out a fair amount of the text, and the reasoning for that at the time of writing was obviously including appropriate measures to manage construction impacts, full stop as it was perhaps considered sufficient in the sense that you're reading this policy as a whole. So in managing construction impacts, you have regard to the ecological survey and criterion A, you have regard to demonstrating that adverse effects can be avoided. But we do note from the statements that there's some concern from the Wildlife Trust and Miss Hamilton in particular that might be interpreted as diluting protections during the construction phase. So we would be happy to reinstate that struck out wording if you considered that would be the most effective approach.
Bear with me. Yeah, so you say we would be happy is that something that you're putting forward, or are you asking me?
Well, I think in light of the statements, clearly I think we think it would be more effective, but it is your call. So,
well, I'll put it this way. I'm inclined to agree with you, Mr. Smith. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, we will reinstate that in the final schedule that we put to you. So when you're ready, we'll then go to criterion D.
Yeah.
So criterion D, if you refer back to the main mods version of the policy, if you have that.
I do. If you bear with me one moment. Yes.
So in the main mods version of this policy, the requirement to provide a buffer was actually in as a kind of sub-criteria to managing construction impacts. But obviously you want those buffers to not just be there during construction, you want them to be there as a feature of the site. So we've lifted that out now of the construction impacts, and it is a criterion in its own right.
Yeah.
In the as modded version, the requirement to provide a buffer, if on a strict reading, only applied during the construction phase, whereas we want it to last throughout. So that's why that's been lifted out. And I'll come back to buffers when we go through the supporting text. But again, I think there's a possibility that for effectiveness, again, that some of that struck out text may be more effective to reinstate, but I think we need to look at the supporting text first so you can come to a decision on that.
So if you just bear with me a moment. Right, so put a pin in that for a moment.
Yeah, please do. Criterion E, unchanged. Then underneath that, we've struck out the sentence about proposals on non-designated sites because we've now lifted that reference out. It's in SP12 as part of the hierarchy, and therefore you interpret NEX proportionately having regard to non-designated sites where relevant.
So just so that so everyone's clear about that, the reference to non-designated sites there, you propose to strike that out because that is a point that's already covered.
Yes, because we've added non-designated sites to the hierarchy in SP12, and then in the opening paragraph to NEX, we tie those two together by requiring appropriate protection.
Okay.
Okay, so if you want me to move on, I can go through the supporting text, which slightly unhelpfully is all numbered 11.xx. So we'll just go through it a paragraph at a time. Obviously, the first paragraph, no changes. The second paragraph, again, the red text is the additional. We've expanded on the sources from which important habitats and species can be identified. So previously it just said the Hertfordshire Environmental Record Centres, but obviously you can also pick that up. The government's magic mapping tool is something run by DEFRA, which picks up priority habitats, nature improvement areas, and so on. And obviously to have reference to the survey process, because the site-specific survey can also turn up or highlight relevant features.
Right.
Yeah, on the third paragraph, was talking about biodiversity metrics. Again, the main mods version referred to the then current DEFRA metric.
That's the biodiversity impact calculator.
Yeah, that's the footnote that's struck through at the bottom. And as we put in our statement, the intention was to make references to biodiversity impact tools more generic. So this is paragraph 8 of our statement, the final bullet, recognising that approaches were likely to evolve over the lifetime of the plan, and that change having particular regard to the prospective provisions of the Environment Bill, and the proposals related to net gain. So we put in a more generic reference to appropriate biodiversity impact tools. Again, from the statements.
So if you bear with me a moment. Yeah.
From the statements, there was concern from the Wildlife Trust in particular that the wording we've proposed might be used by some to, use some tools that don't quite cut the mustard in their book. They would like something a bit more precise. Again, we'd be happy to have a reference to the current DEFRA biodiversity metric, but I'm also conscious that the Environment Bill currently coming through, that will obviously become mandatory statutory, makes reference to a biodiversity metric being produced by the Secretary of State and subject to revision and republication. So I think we're content to make reference to the current DEFRA metric as the kind of industry standard tool, but we just need to be careful with the wording to make sure it isn't overtaken by events as and when the Environment Bill comes into force.
Yeah, so the biodiversity impact calculator, so as I understand it then, Environment Bill bringing something forward,
Yes.
potentially.
Yeah, the footnote in the submitted plan, as I understand it, and Mr. Dodds or others may be able to provide a bit more expert illumination on this, is the footnote in the submitted plan was to the original DEFRA biodiversity metric. Let's call it metric 1. That's since been superseded. So there's a new DEFRA metric, and there may potentially be an alternate one that comes forward through the Environment Bill, because obviously that hasn't got royal assent yet, so we don't quite know what it's going to be. I think the concern was around the words appropriate tools, because there was a concern that could become an area of debate at an appeal or somewhere. An applicant could argue that their tool was appropriate, and someone may argue it's not. So I think we just need to be more specific. So I'm happy
to give lawyers work unnecessarily, Mr. Smith.
Oh, precisely. So yeah, I think again, for effectiveness, I think we'd suggest some wording along the lines of, use the DEFRA biodiversity metric or any statutorily prescribed successor or something like that covers us off. Yeah,
I mean, I think on that point, this really ought to do what you want it to do.
Yes.
For effectiveness, as I think I'm right in saying that currently you would want people to use the biodiversity impact calculator that is currently in place, and if that's superseded by something new coming through the Environment Bill / Act,
yes,
you would presumably consider that to be the most appropriate.
Yes. Yes, well, because that would become the statutory tool at that point. So yeah, I think when we said appropriate tools, it was always intended to encompass that, but clearly from the statements, if
that's what you had in your mind.
Yes, exactly. But clearly what's in my mind doesn't necessarily translate onto how people interpret it on paper. So again, we're more than happy to respond to the statements of Ms. Hamilton and the Wildlife Trust and just tweak that wording.
Yes, well, if you can remember it, I think the wording that you gave off the cuff just a moment ago wasn't bad as a first attempt.
It wasn't entirely off the cuff; it was scribbled in the margins. So there was a bit of thought went into it.
Okay. So should I note, for the purpose of my note, then, is that to say that the council is going to put forward a modification, tweaking the wording
Yes.
there to refer to any new, would it be a statutory metric, or would it simply be a metric published by the government?
We'll have a look at the wording of the latest drafting of the bill and frame it accordingly. My reading of it was that it might be statutory in the sense that it's referred to in the Act, but
yeah,
I will defer to the lawyers on the wording of that one.
And sometimes with these things, we're never quite sure what's going to happen as the bill makes its way through the process. So that's presumably, is it then to, in effect, reinstate, even if it's only for a short shelf life, the current biodiversity impact calculator, and to refer to then the subsequent metric coming forward?
Yes.
Is that right?
Yeah, just trying to future-proof us in as far as we can.
Okay.
So moving on to the following paragraph, that's a proposed wholly new paragraph, which again just reinforces the point around interpreting the policy proportionately, again, taking its lead from MPPF 113. Perhaps a case to be made as to whether that should be policy or supporting text. I think it's okay as supporting text in that it links to criterion B, which already talks about the hierarchy of protection.
Right. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean, I'm not. I have to say, I do wonder if it might. I mean, I think you're right, but I do wonder if it might strengthen criterion B if that were embedded within the policy rather than than supporting text.
Yeah, and that might be something that you might want to firm a view up on once other people have had the opportunity to speak. I don't know if they may have views on that or not, but again, certainly we're happy to accommodate that if that's the outcome.
Yeah, I mean, I do wonder for effectiveness, but I mean, I've dealt with appeals where people point to things that are, you know, in paragraphs rather than in policy.
Yes.
And say, well, it's not policy, is it? And you know, you do get quite a bit of arguing at that kind of stage over that sort of thing. I'd say I do wonder for effectiveness that might be.
Yeah, that's fine. We'll lift that up into the policy. I know it's a conversation we had in the previous sessions around where the balance is between policy, which is the policy, and the supporting text. So we can do it. Yeah, we'll just add it as a paragraph underneath those sub-criteria in B. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it's probably part of criterion B, isn't it? But,
yes.
But a separate bit to it after the 3-point list.
Yeah.
Right, okay, I shall just note that. Okay.
So carrying on through, obviously no changes to the following 2 paragraphs of the supporting text from that consulted on at main mods. Your picture froze for a moment, so do you hear that?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I heard you fine.
Yep, that's fine. So then the following paragraph is sort of the last paragraph on the page is printed. It does go over the page, then gets into buffers, which is the item I asked you to put a pin in a few minutes back. Again, when redrafting the policy, we just sort of checked back to precisely what the wording was in the submitted evidence, which is where the amendment came from. But in fairness, on review, we missed a couple of quite important words out of that. So it should be, our evidence recommends that buffers should provide 12 metres of complementary habitat around wildlife sites, brackets, district wildlife site level and above. But it should also say, and trees and hedgerows, because there are 2 separate references in NHE 15, which is the Green Infrastructure Study, to the provision of buffers. We've only quoted one of them.
Okay, if you bear with me a moment. Right, I'm going to have to start counting which paragraph it is we're talking about now. So,
on the 7th.
4, 5, 6. Yeah, is it?
Yeah, I'll make it the 7th.
Right. So sorry, that was to add reference to tree planting.
Trees and hedgerows. I can give you the references in the evidence base if you want, just to be able to cross-check that later.
Please, yeah.
So the reference, they're both in NHE 15.
Yeah.
And the reference to buffers around wildlife sites is on page 134 of that.
Yeah.
And the separate reference to trees and hedgerows is on page 137.
Thank you.
And obviously the final sentence of that, again, sort of linking to the point around giving proportionate protection is the correctness of buffers will be considered having regard to the status of the relevant habitat.
Yeah, just bear with me. Yeah, okay.
And probably a similar point to what we just discussed a couple of paragraphs ago. I asked you to put a pin in criterion D. Again, it's that I think D is sufficient in that it, again, talks about providing any buffers of complementary habitat. So it's quite a wide-ranging requirement. And again, the supporting text provides the current recommendation coming out of our evidence, which is in this instance probably the best place for it because the green infrastructure study is quite old in the tooth now. So that is something that may get renewed sooner rather than later.
So bear with me. Well, long in the tooth, you say, but you're still relying on it.
Yes, we're relying on it at this stage.
So in fact, this part of the policy says applicants should, having regard to the status of any affected sites or features, provide any buffers of complementary habitat.
Yes.
I am slightly wondering, I have to be honest, if that's giving you the teeth that you would wish on the point.
I think at the very least, it probably needs the words necessary or required buffers of complementary habitat, but it's whether you want to go further and pick up some of the more detailed text out of that paragraph, which I don't have an off-the-cuff version for, but we can look at if you consider that would be beneficial.
Yeah, I mean, okay, you do have some wording there in paragraph 11XX, saying that your evidence recommends this and that. Buffers should provide 12 meters of complementary habitat. And then you're going to add, as you say, the reference to tree and hedgerow planting. It just doesn't seem to me, well, put it this way, it's not the most specific bit of policy wording in this plan.
Well, Should we put the pin back in it until we've heard from others? Because in fairness, I appreciate we're unloading quite a lot of changes on as we go along, and I'm sure other participants will want to say it's noted as something we will revisit, but rather than conjuring up wording on the go, let's hear from others. And
I certainly don't want that. Policy making on the hoof in that way is not the best way to do things. Absolutely. So, okay, fine. We'll pop the pin back in momentarily.
Yep. Okay, and so then over the page in ED 176, just in the penultimate paragraph of the supporting text, there's just one final change, which again talks about using recognised biodiversity impact tools, which given the previous conversation, we'll just again tweak that wording so it aligns with whatever we put in the preceding paragraph.
Yeah, so that's in effect a consequential change relating to the metric that should be used.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, good. Well, I understand all of that. I'm going to look now to others. Mr. Dodds.
Hello there.
Good morning.
Good morning. I'd just like to say that was really interesting listening to Nigel there, and to thank him for listening to the points that we made. I'm really pleased that he's accepted the majority of that, and I wouldn't really dispute. Well, actually, I'm very pleased with the changes that he's made. Going back to the point that you put a pin in about the 12 meters of complementary habitat. I think the more specific you can be in terms of complementary habitat and buffers, the easier it'll be for everyone down the line. If you say a appropriate buffer, then a developer will say, well, that's 1 meter. And it happens all the time. So the more you can specify a minimum distance, the better it is. So whether that's in policy or in supporting wording, I don't care, whichever is the most effective. I could talk for a lot longer, I'm sure, but I won't, because I'm actually very pleased with what Nigel suggested, and I hope that you are too. So I'll stop there, unless you want me to talk again.
Thank you, Mr. Dodds. Mr. Nanda.
Yeah, thank you. I must admit that we've struggled with this area of the policy, and I think it's because it feels like it's a lot of good words, but then I kind of put myself in a developer's sort of situation, and I kind of think, well, what does it actually mean to them? And perhaps there's sort of other documentation that I'm unaware of, but when it sort of talks about the hierarchy and the protection, how do people know what the different protections are for the different levels of hierarchy? There's an awful lot of different sort of areas of land sort of discussed. So you've got the Chilterns area of natural beauty, which I believe is a national designated site. You've got international designated sites, locally designated sites, wildlife corridors, ancient woodland and hedgerows, wetlands, rivertime habitats, local geography sites, protected species, priority species, habitats, and it's sort of, down to landscape character, locally sensitive features, strategic multifunctions, other open spaces. Pardon me, at the end of it, just reading this is sort of coming to it and say, how's this going to protect my area? I feel like I want to see a table that sort of says, well, these are the different areas. And, according to the NPFF, I think you won't build on a nationally or internationally designated site. Is that true of a locally? So what's protected by having no building on it? What's protected by sort of other mitigations? And I don't know, I just was left with this feeling a bit like you've just said, it's kind of got this cozy lot of nice words like enhancing, protecting, all this stuff. But what will that actually do? How will it actually work in reality? Is it strong enough to actually protect the biodiversity in our area from a developer? And I don't know, just the whole thing. And I know it's an overarching feel at the end of it, just leaves me feeling that like other areas that maybe are a lot stronger in this plan than this is for actually telling us truly what will happen if a developer looks at a site, you know, and perhaps it's a windfall site rather than one in this plan. What will actually be, what will they be stopped from doing or not stopped from doing, depending on the designation? Now, perhaps it's somewhere else, and I've not got into the teeth of that as a layperson, but it just feels like it's not got enough clarity in it.
Yeah, I mean, to answer your question, I think the way developers know what they could or couldn't do, or maybe could do, is ask a town planner, and then speak to the local authority if need be. I mean, in my experience, these I call them biodiversity policies can be quite tricky to construct, and that is because of the way national policy is constructed. So it's not as simple as, well, in this particular designation, no building at all. It's not that black and white as you'll have seen in the NPPF.
Yeah. And
that is why policies are often constructed in ways just like the one that I've got in front of me today.
Yeah, it's a bit worrying, isn't it, for the future of the planet and biodiversity, that we can't somehow, but I mean, if that's how it is, it's just, and maybe that's just how it reads, as, you know, someone come fresh to it, you think, gosh, is this really going to protect us? Yeah,
well, that's, I mean, as I say, that's part of, I mean, my aim today, as I said at the outset, is to make sure that it's consistent with national policy in terms of the different types, the hierarchy of designations, and also really to make sure that it is effective, so that the council would have the ability to reject proposals that weren't consistent with the policy. So that's, well, quite a bit of the discussion this morning has been a little bit about that already.
So, but when it says hierarchy, that's just a list in some ways. It isn't actually, it's not linked in any way to what has to happen. Is that my misinterpretation of the word hierarchy? I was expecting that to be the most important first, you know, in terms of how it's going to be protected, but that's probably a misinterpretation, is it?
No, the word hierarchy, it is just that. So it is the the internationally designated sites at the very top, down to sort of more local designations at the bottom. So and national policy brings about different levels of protection for. Sorry, I'm getting feedback here, which is putting me off my stride a little. What was I saying? Yeah, so and national policy does in effect bring about different levels of protection depending on where sites are in the hierarchy.
Because that was the one other thing that I got a little confused about a bit when we got onto policy NEX, where it talks about the mitigation and it talks about locating on an alternative site with a less harmful impact. And when we're looking at planning permission for a development, I could see partly you might be able to move to a different area within a very large site, perhaps, that had green spaces. But I don't know, it struck me that actually if you're located on a different site, you're not doing planning permission for that site anymore. That was the other thing I wondered, if that had sort of come out of the NPPF, but not quite into the same sort of slot, where, you know, if you you can see how you could make it work, but it sort of had, I remember reading it in the NPPF, and it sort of said, you know, your first step is to go somewhere else. Don't go, you know, go and build somewhere else. And then it's sort of in that policy NEX under if planning permission for a site. And I was thinking, well, then it says, well, we'll go somewhere else. And I was thinking, well, surely then you're not doing planning permission for that site. Is that, perhaps that's me, that's, you could perhaps do it within the site. I've realised this morning, it's just a bit, I don't know, it just struck me. I could see the words, but they weren't working for me when I was reading them very, very well. But anyway, I'll leave you to sort the words out, because I'm sure you're much more experienced at that than me. I just thought I would give you what it felt like looking at it from someone who cares about biodiversity, and you read it and you think, is this going to protect us?
Your take on that, Mr. Smith?
I think it's sort of largely as you suggested. So obviously we've got the hierarchy, we've got we've got obviously the policy that talks about proportionate protection, and as you say, ultimately it's a judgment on a case-by-case basis. When if we get a planning application, we will consult with the Wildlife Trust, with Herts Ecology, and we will take their expertise on board in coming to a recommendation. There is an element of horses to courses for this. I know from conversations with Mr. Dodds before about, even about buffers, there's a difference, isn't there, between having a back garden or a road verge within a buffer area versus sticking, the flank wall of someone's house. There's a bit of a give and take, and I think rather than sort of slavishly putting something in policy, you do need to allow that allowance for site specifics and looking at the detail of the scheme that comes forward. And as we discussed, in any event, a lot of this is likely to be sort of overtaken by the Environment Bill, which will mandate a level of biodiversity net gain which must be achieved. So as we said, we've tried to make sure we've future-proofed ourselves ready for that, and that will come along as well.
Ms. Hamilton.
Good morning, Inspector. I would also like to thank the council for listening to our comments regarding some of the sub bits, etc. We do have, one quick question regarding that is that we've added to SB12 D important habitats and species. I'm taking and important species as being any of the species listed in the government DEFRA list that's on their website. Mr. Smith, is that correct? European, both European and
yeah, we've left it as a generic reference because obviously that can pick up protected species, but I know also, again, consulting with the Wildlife Trust, sometimes you might have a locally important population that isn't necessarily on a statutory list, so it just makes sure that we can kind of pick up everything. Again, it's horses for courses again.
Okay. The one issue that I have, and it is a big issue, and I do feel that it is against policies currently being implemented and looked at and changes being made in the new bill, and this is quite a serious situation. It's about the buffer, the little buffer paragraph, not the bigger buffer, but it's to do with the 11XX paragraph 7. So basically, first off, if I get it up on my screen, so first off, it states our evidence recommends that buffers, what did say that buffers are provided, and now it says buffers should provide. Well, that should makes it quite airy-fairy. Are is definite, has got to be done. Should is, can we wiggle around that, get away with it, blah, blah, blah. So that's one big concern.
Is airy-fairiness a test of soundness, Miss Hamilton?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And the other thing that's concerning regarding it is the fact that you've taken out for all connective features for wildlife habitats or priority habitats, which basically covers anything. So if you've got like an area which has got like a lot of biodiversity in it that's going to be harmed and impacted upon, then that should be for all connective features for wildlife habitats or priority habitats. By taking that out and just putting district wildlife site level and above, that is actually definitely going against sort of what they're trying to introduce to ensure a net gain. And I think by taking those words out, you're going to get a lot of people say, oh, well, district wildlife site and over. Well, unfortunately, a lot of important sites within North Hertfordshire aren't district wildlife site and over because they haven't been, let me see what I wrote down, try and get my words out properly, because they haven't received that status, they haven't been given that status, even though they're still very, very important sites. So I think if the original wording was to be left, or there was wording incorporated regarding, yes, buffers are provided, 12 metres, complementary habitat, and if you wanted to keep that bit in, that's fine, but it should be for all connective features for wildlife habitats. And I stand by that, because when the policy originally came out as well, which was about 4 years ago, I know that, like I said in my statement, a lot of the NGOs looked through your policies, and they were okay with them. So that when that policy changed in November 2019, which was like 3 years later, people that would have maybe had a concern about that, the actual wording of that policy there, that sub bit, the bit underneath, obviously didn't say anything, because at the time everyone was okay with it. That's it. Thank you.
Mr. Dodds. You're on mute, Mr. Dodds.
Sorry, sir. Yeah, just quickly to respond to Nikki's points. I think, Nigel, you had suggested that you change that back to hedgerows and trees. Is that right? I think in effect, those are the most likely priority habitats that will be affected by development and need to be incorporated into. So I'm relatively comfortable with that, although I wouldn't complain about, for all connective features, for wildlife habitats or priority habitats, going back in, particularly the mention of priority habitats. So that's my first point. My other point was to respond to Julia Sananda regarding the protection this gives. I think the first thing to realize about planning is that nothing is actually protected, is totally protected, whether it's a triple SI or a national nature reserve, but there are levels of protection. I think it's the more important they are, the harder they are to propose development on successfully. But irrespective of all that, you have to show, and this local plan is, I think, quite effective in my opinion at doing this. Now, you have to show that you can mitigate. So first, avoid, mitigate, or compensate for any losses that you make to that particular habitat. Now, the biggest weapon for you in that regard is the biodiversity impact calculator, the biodiversity metric, because that measures the value of certain habitats. Previously, and the current situation as interpreted by some local authorities and virtually all ecological consultants, is that this is subjective judgment. So what it means is that they will say, well, we'll chew up that semi-improved grassland and give you a few bat boxes and that's a net gain. That's patent nonsense. And this is why the policy is important to state that you have the DEFRA metric as your basis for measurably, as MPPF says, measurably calculating the ecological value of any particular site. So I just wanted to give you reassurance that including that wording is extremely powerful, both now in the vacuum between the Environment Bill and this local plan being produced. And there are developments going forward now, so it's critical that's in there. And it really produces an evidential base. You have to have evidence to say. I mean, that's not to say things won't get lost, because they will, because the local planning authority will deem some development to be in the public interest, and that's fair enough. But it has to be mitigated, compensated, and the DEFRA metric is the best that in my professional lifetime in terms of a tool for ensuring that the intentions of NPPF and national planning policy is actually meaningful, rather than left to the subjective judgment of someone who's being paid for by a developer. And that's what I've got to say. Thank you.
Ms. Hamilton.
Yes, I apologise regarding the trees and hedges. I didn't know whether that was new trees and hedges being planted, or sort of like all current hedge lines and like trees. Does that class as woodland? So yeah, it's like I said, yeah, it may be airy fairy. Yes, I do think it should just have that put back in, like, just to make it all sort of sound clear and tie it all up and all the loose ends. So trees, hedges, and the connecting habitat, blah blah blah. So that would be we would be very happy with that. But thank you for listening to us regarding the other items, Nigel.
Yeah, just on the point about connective features, which is proposed to be deleted here. Is that an issue, Mr. Smith?
It's not, in the sense, obviously, tests of soundness wise, what we put in the plan has to be justified. The reference to wildlife sites, trees and hedgerows is specifically what's written in the evidence study, I think. But I think it's also, I guess, important to make clear that that isn't necessarily exhaustive. That's almost a statement of fact, that sentence, you know, that is what our evidence recommends. But if you look at the first sentence, which we haven't presently proposed any amendments to, it does say developments are required to demonstrate how existing wildlife habitats such as trees, hedgerows, woodlands, rivers will be retained, safeguarded and managed during and after development, including the provision of buffers where required, which is a bit of a mouthful. But I think there is scope within that, and it's perhaps in that sentence if we wanted to put connective features back in, because we can just identify that as something where a buffer may be appropriate, rather than, we can't say something's in our evidence when it's not, I guess is what I'm trying to say. The evidence is quite focused in its recommendations, so I think we just need to put that in there as a statement of fact. But I think there's an acknowledgement that, you know, there are other features for which buffers might be appropriate in that first sentence of the supporting text.
Yeah, because I think the point, or part of the point that Mr. Dodds, I think it was, made, was that quite often it is, you know, woodland hedgerows that are the connective features.
Yes.
Not always necessarily the case.
Yeah, but I'd say in order to address the point, I think within that first sentence where it says developments are required to demonstrate how, I think adding in the phrase connective features or and connective features at an appropriate point within that sentence, I think would address the point. As I say, we can't say something is in our evidence when it isn't, because plainly that wouldn't be true. But again, I think it's sensible to address the point for effectiveness.
Yeah, so do I. So I'll take that as to add reference to connective or connecting, either.
Yes.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just revisiting the pinned point.
I was going to come back to that. So yes, or I was going to point you back to that, remind you that there was still a pin in D.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think that as currently written, D could certainly be more effective than it is currently worded.
Yep.
Particularly given that you are relying on evidence, which then leads to quite an expansion in effect, doesn't it, then in the supporting paragraphs. And it seems to me that you, in effect, what you're having to do here is to go to a paragraph that, isn't it, well, we say supporting, really it's sort of explain that those paragraphs really should be about explaining the reason for the policy, and what actually is the policy should be in the policy. I think you've got quite a bit of seepage here of what should be in the policy is instead in the explanatory text. That would be that's my view on it.
Okay, that's fine. As I say, that's something we're happy to address in some draft modifications for you.
and that's the, sorry, it's the 7th paragraph 11.xx, isn't it?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, thank you. Ms Hamilton.
Yes, just going back to that. So SP12 at the moment, I don't know where we are with it or not. I'm trying to follow. SP12, I know that you're going to look at it, but it says any buffers, any. That again, airy fairy unsoundness wise. Going back to the 7th paragraph, I said it originally said are provided. Now it says should. Again, that weakens it. So that's both of those points. Any in SP12 and should really be are provided, I would have said,
My
to make it very.
apologies. My apologies. If you just bear with me. So I'm looking at SP12, Ms Hamilton. Whereabouts in SP?
D on the buffer line, D. And it says, oh
Are
God, hang on.
we looking at the same thing?
I think we're on NEX again, so rather than SP12.
Oh, is it? Oh, sorry. Am I on
That's
the
it.
wrong thing?
Is it NEX?
Oh,
You mean?
yes. Sorry. Yes, NEX.
Okay.
I do apologise.
No problem. All right. So
Yes,
NEX.
provide any buffers of complementary habitat. That just seems a little bit woolly.
Yeah. That is in effect what I've just said.
Oh, I do apologise, sir.
No, and Mr. Smith is, unless he corrects me, in agreement, I think, and agrees that a main modification should rectify that, and just for so that everyone's clear, and that ought to include picking up, or I would say, I'm not going to quite say moving the words, but because this, right, I'll start again. In that 7th paragraph, 11.xx, what the council has in effect agreed with me that it should put forward is some changes to the wording there to refer to connective features, and also to add reference again to tree and hedgerow planting, but has also agreed that that wording, once rewritten, should be in the policy itself, so that the bit of the policy that talks about the buffer, that's where the wording should go, to make sure that that is properly effective, or as you might put it, not airy-fairy.
The last little thing on that, my only concern that's left with that is the fact that we've highlighted district wildlife sites and above. Does that take it away from all the, I don't know if Matt Dodds wants to come in on this, does that take it away from all the other wildlife sites, like local wildlife sites or sites that are awaiting status? Does that do that?
You'll have to forgive me because I'm not sure what you mean.
Okay, paragraph 7, on the 11xx paragraph 7, it says 12 meters. So it used to say originally, it used to say 12 meters of complementary habitat for all connective features for wildlife habitat or priority habitats. And now it says on there, it says around wildlife sites, then in brackets it says district wildlife site level and above. Well, surely that means that any other sites that are local wildlife sites or just priority habitats are removed, because that's been highlighted. Is that the case? Maybe. I don't know, but I just.
Bear with me.
It's like it's only going to refer to really important wildlife sites. Maybe I'm reading that wrong, Mr. Smith. If I am, I apologise.
I think that district wildlife sites and above is a reference back, is it, to the hierarchy in SP12?
It is, yeah. I mean, district wildlife site level and above is kind of the precise wording that is in the evidence study. So that is what is quoted there. But you're right, it's because the hierarchy refers to locally designated sites. I think in this instance, district wildlife site is effectively local wildlife sites because they are the sites that are identified at district level. But again, it's something we can look in the detailed wording and say the reference there is just quoting directly out of our evidence study because that's what the evidence study says, but we just need to make sure that everybody's clear on what that does mean. And again, bring up Ms. Hamilton's point, that's not to say that buffers wouldn't necessarily be required around other priority habitats. It's just saying that is what the evidence says. And I think the other sentences within that do allow us to require buffers where needed on things that aren't wildlife sites.
I mean, I think where your evidence base has used slightly different language, I mean, it's probably more important to read the language in the plan. Because as you say, here, for obvious reasons, you've said locally designated sites rather than district wildlife sites. So does that answer your question, Ms. Harton?
Yes, yes. I think all or any priority habitat or biodiversity important sites should be just included in that, so it's covered, and that would be moving forward as well and towards the new environment bill. That'd be brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dodds.
Yeah, local wildlife sites are the same as district wildlife sites in my interpretation, but I think it would be more consistent if they were referred to in the text as local wildlife sites. That's the standard way of talking about them generally, and it's also mentioned in MPPF as local wildlife sites, so that would be more consistent. And the priority habitat element is quite important, but priority habitats, hedgerows are priority habitats, and they are continuous, and so that is picked up by the priority habitat reference and the continuous what was the term? Connective features for wildlife. I mean, if that is linked to priority habitats, that means that that's covered. But generally, a connective feature is a hedgerow or a river, something that is continuous. So.
Okay. I think we've probably got to where we can or where we need to be on this, unless anyone else has any final points to raise before I ask Mr. Smith if anything that he wants to pick up on. Okay, Mr. Smith.
No, I think we've covered all the areas we need to. Obviously, we've got some sort of agreed changes that we need to go away and just draft or reinstate for effectiveness. And obviously, we'll do that as part of the drafting of the main mods that come out of that follow on from these sessions as a whole.
Okay, great. Right, so just on a practical point, we have the wash-up session, which is scheduled for this afternoon, I think, isn't it?
Yes, it's for 2 o'clock at the moment.
Yeah. Do we need to wait until 2 o'clock, or could we do that at, say, 11? Or sooner? I don't know.
I'm happy to do it after a break. Yes, I can't imagine there's that many people that have 2 o'clock marked in their diaries, but it will be recorded on YouTube in any case if they want to catch up after.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll maybe suggest sort of maybe 11:15, if that suits everyone.
Yeah. Yes, that's fine.
Okay, marvellous. In which case then I make it 10:09. I adjourn the hearing to the wash-up session, which will start at 10:45. Thank you.
Yes, so just before you do that, it was my understanding from what you said yesterday that that will literally just be the council, that there won't be any other participants. So does that remain your position on that?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it needs to be live streams.
Of course, yes, of course.
It's done in public, but yeah, I mean, it's simply, you know, an administrative.
Yeah.
Miss Hamilton, you're raising your real life hand. Oh, and your virtual one.
Yes. Mr. Barclay, please can you advise us, because I don't know what else to do. Miss St John Howe is not around today. Some things have materialised from Monday, and we've got a bit of an urgent situation, and we don't know how to address it with you, sir. Some things have come up, and the Hearts ecologist has contacted me, and they feel that one of your sites could actually contravene the Badger Act, which could be breaking the law. And we really feel this needs to be addressed, but we don't know how to go about doing it. The things only came up on Monday's hearing, so we weren't able to sort of come back to you on those. But we really feel like we need to be able to let both yourself and Mr. Smith know the situation.
So what and obviously I've had my hearing sessions on all of the sites, and I've heard the evidence.
Yes, exactly.
On that. You know, what I can't do is countenance new evidence just pouring in and pouring in. You know, I have to turn the tap off at some point. I mean, the examination's 3 years old, and
Exactly.
I suppose my question is, why is this evidence only coming now? I mean,
Because
I'm assuming that
the reason it's only coming now is, firstly, Picture SRL brought some things to the table at the end of the hearing on Monday that we weren't aware of, and secondly, they've also compiled a report at the end of November which wasn't able to be commented on, and we still haven't even seen it. But some of the things that have come up on Monday at the end of the hearing, both the chair of the Hearts and Middlesex Badger Group and the Hearts ecologist have heard it, and they do feel that we could be breaking the law with this site, and would like to just be able to respond to you these really important points, and to Mr. Smith.
Right. Well, I think I probably need to know a bit more, but I don't want to do that here and now.
No, sir.
So if you pick it up in the usual route via
Yes, sir.
St John Howe.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I know she's not available this week. I think she is next week. I think so.
That's
anyway.
brilliant. Thank you, sir. We will do that. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Yes. Is there anything else before I enact that adjournment?
I think just from a practical point of view, and Lewis might be able to help, in terms of keeping the live stream up, I think we'll have to use this meeting for the wash up. So if we could ask other participants who aren't supposed to be in here to leave, because I think the YouTube stream for the previous wash up session won't kick in until 2 o'clock. So we need to stay in this meeting if it's to be seen.
Oh,
That's correct. That would make things easier. Thank you, Nigel.
yes, thank you for that. Okay, then, in which case I'll adjourn until 10:45. Thank you all very much for your contributions. Thank you. Oh, shit. Okay, it is now 10:45. Yeah, so I thought it'd be useful to have this wash-up session, as I've called it, just to cover a few things. And I thought it'd be worth just having a look through the draft main modifications that you've helpfully provided me with a list of, just to check through those and to check anything in relation to any further bits of work or anything like that. Also, the question of how to present the main modifications in terms of numbering, etc., so that it is as uncomplicated as it can be for me, because we've got various versions of some main modifications. I think in other circumstances, I may be wrong here, but I think we've also got some main mods that in effect alter other bits from other main mods as well. So it's kind of really just have a sort of discussion about how that can best be presented, as well, just to catch up in relation to further hearings, in where we are in relation to BK3, and indeed where we are in relation to the master plan main modifications that the council has talked about putting forward. Also as well, just to see if there are any other procedural issues or anything else going forward that it might be useful for us to talk about. As well, just to get a quick bit of feedback, I think, in terms of the use of Zoom, because certainly for me that's been an experience anyway, and frankly, if there was anything else that the council thought it might be useful for us to discuss, it would be appropriate to discuss in this sort of forum, to do just that, really. So that's sort of how I've envisaged using this time. So shall we have a look through the main modification, the draft list that you've sent me first of all, if I can just pull that up. So I've had the opportunity to have a look through this. I haven't had the opportunity to fine-tooth comb it to check it for completeness, as you know, obviously that's something that I'll need to do. Are you quite confident, Mr. Smith, that that is where it should be?
Yeah, we think that's everything. I know Ms. St. John Howe just sent through a query, so we've titled it "Modifications Arising from the Hearing Sessions," which is probably technically not correct. It's probably modifications following them, in that it goes back to ED 176, which were the mods we put in last November, and then obviously iteratively through use class order land supply, we've picked up other things along the way. So we've been back through those, and as far as we're concerned, yes, this should be it.
Yeah. Okay.
Touch wood.
So does that then in effect pick up on all main mods that are either new or otherwise altered since the November 2018 main mods consultation?
That's correct. Yeah, we did the main mods obviously January through April 2018. You wrote your letters then in July, August.
Yeah. And
up until that point, we hadn't proposed anything further. I think it was only when we responded to you in November last year, as say ED 176 had a schedule attached to it, which I say even bits within that have been superseded by subsequent discussions around use class order and so on. So yeah, I think it's from ED 176 onwards, and picking up things like the statement of common ground with the county council, the papers we've done on land supply, obviously the use class order and the most recent hearing sessions. And we think that should all be in there.
Yeah, okay. Good. I mean, I don't know, I mean, in part this is a session for you just as much as it is for me. So I don't know if you think it's going to be useful to go through these now or not.
No, I think it'd be useful certainly at a high level, as we've set out. Those are the modifications we intend to draft up, and clearly if there's any where you're thinking of going in a different direction, it's helpful to know that before we draft them up, because our intention is to draft these and send them for sustainability appraisal screening kind of in this interim period, because what we don't want to do is have the further hearings in January, February, and then have to initiate a process of sustainability appraisal, because that's just further delay. We appreciate that some of that screening may be sort of provisional and subject to some final changes, depending on how you respond to both the further information we need to put in on a couple of matters and those hearings in February. But it seems the most sensible use of time to get that process rolling.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, what I can't do, I mean, for example, you've got your main modification, main mods here in relation to OAN and housing requirement. Clearly, those are things that I do need to think about before I can sort of reach conclusions. I suppose if the concern is that you were to draft and then consult on main modifications that I was then not happy with, that is not a position that I want this, not a direction that this examination will go, full stop.
In that case, yes, it's a matter, isn't it, having a conversation about how we best address that, because obviously we want everything to be ready to go as soon as possible after those January, February hearings, but plainly that involves some input from yourself on the matters we've heard. And as I say, we've set out a list based on our understanding of matters as they stand at the moment and our position. But yes, sort of how we get across that part, I guess we need to discuss. And as you've also mentioned, you've frozen. I'll wait for you to come back.
Oh.
Mate, you're there. Okay.
Oh, yeah, okay.
I think it tends to only be the picture that freezes. The audio stays, but I'm never quite sure. And as also, as you've said, presentationally about how best we do these, because and kind of what's the starting point for this set of mods? Because obviously we've got the submitted plan, we've had the mods, and a bit like ED 176 we've looked at this morning, we've got sort of mods to mods, and obviously we want to make sure the consultation is focused only on those bits which are changing now rather than reopening or appearing to re-invite comment on things that you've already consulted upon. So I think a discussion about whether the starting point in drafting these up is the submitted plan or the plan is already proposed to be modified, and then we can format things appropriately from that point to make it clear.
Sorry, I didn't follow, sorry.
So if you look at ED 176, it's probably best to look at a practical example.
We'll do that if I still have it open.
In any particular example in there.
Yeah.
So just on the first page, take SP3 on that first page as an example.
Yeah.
Those mods effectively take the submitted plan as their starting point. It's then got the previously consulted on main mods in sort of bold and struck through in black, and then it's got the further mods in red, which is good in terms of providing an audit trail from start to finish, but in terms of consultation might be a bit confusing as to what exactly we're consulting on.
Yeah, in terms of, on that particular point, it's clear to me that we need to, at this stage, set aside what we've worked on in the past and present this as modifications to the plan as it was originally submitted, because that's the plan that I'm examining. I don't think it's helpful to sort of show things that were proposed, but then have subsequently been proposed for deletion.
Yeah.
If you follow.
Yeah, we'll have a think about it. I say the only issue is that taking that SP3 as an example is that obviously, should that be the version that goes out, we need to present it in a way that it's clear that it's only the text that's sort of read there that's really up for consultation. You know, that the modifications, say, to criterion A there have been consulted on and you have the responses. So, but yeah. that's perhaps too detailed a point for right now. Well,
it's quite important, isn't it? Because, sorry, can you hear me, sir?
If I can, and it is, yes.
Yeah, because obviously what we don't want to do, and I'm sure what you don't want to do, is to put up for consultation all the amendments which we've already consulted on which you've held sessions on.
That's correct.
So, and I appreciate, obviously, ultimately any report will have to set out the modifications in full. You know, in contrast to the submitted plan. But we do need to be careful, as you've indicated, to make sure that what you don't do is you don't then get thousands of representations on matters you've already heard about. I mean, I do wonder whether maybe what we could do is to provide to you the proposed modifications where the ones that have been previously consulted on are in black, whereas the new ones are in red, and to make it clear that it's only the ones in red that are being consulted on this time round, in order to limit the scope of the representations, which no doubt you will inevitably receive. That might be a way to try and focus on the bit that you've yet to consult on.
I think that is a useful suggestion. Thanks for that, Ms. Hornsby. Yeah, I was rather selfishly perhaps thinking about an entirely separate schedule of all the main modifications that I'm going to need for my report.
Of course.
And in terms of that, that needs to be the changes to the original plan.
Yes.
No red, just simply using the strike through and bold. So
would it be helpful if what we produce two documents, one which sets out the final proposed changes as against the submitted plan, so that you have got that document for your report, and we produce a second schedule which identifies the further proposed main modifications in red for the consultation?
Yeah,
would that be helpful?
I think that is the best way to do it. Yeah.
Okay. Mr. Smith, I assume that we could do that for the inspector.
Yes, that's fine.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I think you were saying, Mr. Smith, that you're reasonably confident that the list that you've given me is comprehensive.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think as well, let me just make sure that I've got this right. I think that you were saying, obviously I know that you're keen for my reactions to any main modifications that I might think are problematic or that I'm going to take issue with. And obviously, I mean, let's cut to the chase and focus on OAN and the housing requirement, because those are probably the most important ones, aren't they?
Yeah. Yes.
So yeah, I mean, certainly, if I were to not be with the council on those things, then I would be setting that out as soon as I reasonably could. I mean, I have to say, obviously, I have some availability issues over the coming weeks, and I dare say others do as well. So just on a practical point, as well as me requiring time to go back through the evidence and what I've heard over the past weeks, I'm needing to think about it. I do also have some availability issues as well. But yeah, I mean, those main modifications in terms of drafting aren't especially time consuming in any event, are they? Those particular ones.
OAN, no, I think it's probably more the ones about requirement and supply, because obviously there's policies and site-specific criteria and so on. And I think if there was going to be a significant departure from the council's position, then obviously that's something that we need to feed into this process.
Yeah,
Appreciate it.
Sorry.
You can, Susan.
No. I mean, there are two separate issues here, aren't there? There's the housing requirement for the Stevenage HMA and the supply that is proposed to meet that. And then obviously there's the unmet need for Luton and the supply to meet that. That those are the, I would suggest, the sort of the really key issues which, if you are going to depart from the council's suggested route on that, we would like, I think, to know that sooner rather than later, particularly in relation to the Stevenage HMA, because if you're not with the council in terms of the supply to meet the requirement, that does have quite significant implications for the whole plan.
Yeah.
So in terms of if you're, for example, with Save Our Green Belt and you want to reduce the buffer, then that poses a very big question as to what sites stay in and what sites come out. And then that is a major piece of work. So if we're cutting to the chase, the sooner the council knows about that, the better, one way or the other. Because otherwise, there's not much point us talking about, all these other policies about, what we're going to do or not do with them, because, if you're going to make a fundamental divergence from the council, then, we would need to think about, I'm sure the council would want to think about what it then does. So, the sooner we know about that, the better. And that's the Stevenage HMA. And then obviously there's the Luton HMA, which is a more discrete point, which might, if you were against the council on that, which might not have such fundamental implications for the plan in its entirety.
Yeah. In terms of further work for the council.
Yes, yeah, because it's probably an either in or out, as I think Mr. Smith has indicated. They're either all in or they're all out, really. So I know we've got I think it's the 100, which is in the east of Luton to contribute to the Stevenage HMA. But I suspect the council could just live with that if the Luton sites come out. So that's more discreet. But again, the sooner we know about it, the better. I don't know, Mr. Smith, if there are any other sort of fundamental points, but it seems to me that those are the key issues on which we probably do need to know what the direction of travel is, because otherwise there's not much point really in us carrying on with all these main modifications if you are really going to diverge from what the plan has currently got in it.
Understood. And I fully appreciate that. And I fully appreciate as well that the council would want to undertake consultation on the main modifications as well, as soon as possible. I think as a consequence, at least in part of my availability, I would be looking. Okay, there are two things here. I mean, first of all, I don't intend to issue any sort of interim findings, but I also wouldn't. Basically, I see this main modifications consultation as being about main modifications that I consider necessary. to make the plan sound. Any main modifications that were consulted on this time round would be main modifications that at that stage I consider to be necessary, if you follow my meaning.
Yes.
But as I say, I don't intend to issue any interim findings. Clearly, if I did have an issue with any of the main modifications, particularly the fundamental ones.
I'm afraid you're freezing, sir. So
as I've approached this,
yeah, you are going to have to say that again, because you did freeze at the critical point. You said you were saying that if you had any changes or any modifications that you weren't supportive of, and then you froze.
Right. Okay. Yeah. In just the same way, really, as I've approached this before, rather than setting out interim findings on everything or things that I support, etc., the approach that I've taken throughout this examination, frankly, and others, is to set out any concerns that I have. So if I did have any concerns, then that's what I would get back to the council with in terms of setting.
I'm afraid you've frozen again, sir. Yeah, I'm afraid we didn't get any of that.
Right. Yeah, sorry, I just had a message flashing up on my screen saying that my internet connection is unstable for some reason.
Yeah, it just happens. It's just it's not something any of us can control, I'm afraid.
No, I thought it might be a little better than that, working out of Temple Key House as I have been, but apparently not. Am I back properly now?
Yeah, we can hear you. We can hear you now, sir. I think you were saying that essentially what you're doing is you're indicating your support or disagreement through the main modifications process. So if we are going to be proposing to you main modifications, and if there are any main modifications there that you really don't agree with, you're just going to be saying, well, don't consult on those.
Yeah,
that's I think where we were, rather than an interim report.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think you could expect one of two things to happen: either to receive a letter from me setting out concerns and things that I have problems with, or going out to consultation on the main modifications.
Right. Okay. Thank you. And you were discussing about your availability. So when do you think, taking that into account, we could perhaps, I mean, do we, if we haven't received a letter by a certain time, do we just keep going on the basis that you're not going to write one, or?
Yeah, I mean, on that, if I had concerns, I would be looking to indicate that to the council as early. It wouldn't be. It's not going to be this year.
No. I understand that. Yeah.
It would be as early as possible in January.
Okay.
And yeah, and on that, I think perhaps the best way of dealing with it is to, well, I can indicate, I think, through Mrs. St John Howe, whether or not you should be expecting to receive a letter.
Right. That would be helpful. Thank you. And again, just so that, just for our own sort of timing, can we at least accept that, or expect that we'll either know that by the end of January? We will know where we are by the end of January, for example. Is that a time frame that you can live with? You've said early January.
Yeah, certainly.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So I'm going to note that we agreed that that I will indicate any areas where I have concerns by the end of January.
Right. I mean, you did say earlier that you might be able to do it sooner than that, or is that am I pushing my luck?
I said earlier. Sorry, say that.
I said you did originally say that you might be able to do something in early January. Would we be able to put a slightly earlier date on it, or am I pushing my luck? Oh, and you've frozen again now.
I'm probably pushing your luck a little bit.
Okay.
No.
Okay, but
Am
if
I
we, so
back
I'm so
now?
sorry.
No, I'm just checking if I.
Yeah, because I'm just conscious that we've got these sessions, haven't we? I think we're probably going to go for the 1st and the 2nd of February, which I think are some dates that you've suggested. Can you? Oh, you've frozen now. I don't know if you can hear me or not.
Right.
We're having particular problems, aren't we? It's extraordinary, isn't it? We've actually generally worked quite well. And
this is literally the smallest number of people that we've had in any one of our sessions. Mr. Franklin, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now, but yeah, you are having connection issues. Unfortunately, it just sometimes it just happens, and there's not much we can do about it.
Can you tell whether that's at my end?
I believe it will be at your end because I can see everyone else clearly, and it's just you that keeps freezing.
Right. Okay. I wonder if it persists. Is it likely to help if I were to leave the meeting and rejoin?
That certainly sometimes can help with the connection. If you've, I'm not sure what device you're using at the moment. You're using a computer.
Yes.
If you have Zoom on your phone, it might be worthwhile just logging in there for the last bit of the meeting. No, that's fine. I just thought I would mention it in case.
Okay. Okay. Well, we'll see how we go. If it persists, I'll try leaving and rejoining. So sorry, where were we?
We were talking. We were discussing the sessions that we are going to have on BK3 and master planning, and I was just conscious of the indicate. Just as to when we like, because obviously I think what you're saying is that we'll get the indication prior to those sessions. That's what you're saying, if they're going to be held on the 1st and 2nd of February, which I think is currently the preferred date and one of the dates that you've suggested.
Right. I wasn't aware that the February dates were preferred. But
Is that all right with you, sir? Or
yeah.
Yeah.
I understand. Yeah, I did speak to Mrs. Sinterhouse. So that's originally, I think, the 27th had been suggested, if I recall.
Yes, 27th, and because I think you wanted 2 dates, didn't you? You wanted the 27th and I think the 28th. But Miss Singenhauer is not available on the 28th, and and that week I think is getting quite busy now for me. So on the basis that you also suggested the following week, we were going to suggest to you that perhaps we could have the 1st and the 2nd of February, if that still fits in with your availability.
It does, yeah.
Great. Could we go firm on that now, then, please?
If you just bear with me one.
Thank you.
Moment. Yeah, that's fine. We can take that as a firm agreement.
Thank you very much. And we can expect then to have an indication as to any modifications, big modifications that you're unhappy with by essentially the 31st of January.
Yeah, absolutely. Because like you, I wouldn't want to go ahead with those hearings if there were going to be potentially significant changes happening. So yeah.
All right. Okay.
So I will note here, agreed, indicate concerns by the end of January.
Yeah, thank you. And then just following on from the point that Mr. Smith was making to you, it would be sensible in the meantime, would it, for us just to work up the main, because we don't want to leave everything until the end of January, if assuming that, you know, we can keep going with it, because obviously of the inevitable delay that leads to, and then the issues on the 5-year supply, which is already, as you know, quite tight. So I think what we will do is we will just work up in the meantime the more detailed main modifications. We'll do the sustainability appraisal, so at least if we don't get any indication from you, you know, we're ready to go, and you know, obviously we'll just do that at risk.
Yeah.
Right, you've frozen again now.
Right. Can you
Can't hear you at all. No.
hear me now?
Yes. And you've frozen again now. I do wonder whether it might be better for you to log out and log back in again, because this is becoming a bit problematic.
If I could just interject, if you try turning your camera off, that might help with your connection stability.
Well, Lewis, I think it might be perhaps preferable if the inspector just logs out and logs back in again.
Of course, I'll let him in as soon as he comes back.
Is he logged out?
He hasn't yet.
Right. I mean, Lewis, what would happen? I mean, I don't suppose it's going to make any difference if we just sort of resume this at a bit later. It won't make any difference to the inspector's connection, will it?
Not necessarily. It could
No.
be that the internet he's using is having a bit of a funny turn at that time, depending on how many people are using the Wi-Fi he's got available at the time. That can
Which would be in his building, effectively.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, he's rejoining now. Bear with me.
My
You're back. Don't worry, there's nothing you can do about it, sir. It's just one of those things. There's something none of us have control over.
Indeed. Well, hopefully that's a little bit better.
Yes, that's much better. Yes.
Okay. So, yes, did I say anything that you missed? I don't suppose you know the answer.
You were certainly trying to say something, so, but I'm afraid we couldn't ascertain what it was. I mean, I think I've just been saying that we would work up the main modifications and get them sustainably appraised. Obviously, we will have to do that at risk, but because otherwise there is a genuine concern that if we do carry on with this plan, if we leave everything until February, that as you know, the 5-year supply position is quite tight, and the longer we leave it, the more problematic that becomes. So I think we will just get on and do it, and unless Mr. Smith tells me otherwise. So at least we're ready to go. Hopefully, if we get a clean bill of health.
Yeah, just on the supply point, that reminds me that there is going to be, you said I think you said a statement of common ground, which clearly I will need.
Yes,
in good time.
Yeah, that goes obviously to the Luton issue, in terms of the unmet need and the supply. I think, Mr. Smith, we're relatively hopeful that we will get that done in the next week or so. I think one way or the other we will have something to give to you, sir. Is that fair, Mr. Smith?
Yeah, certainly that's our aim, is to respond before Christmas. yeah, hopefully with a statement of common ground, but to be honest, if we can't reach agreement in that time, then I think we just put a statement into you setting out what's happened in the position, because we appreciate you need the information and to move forward on this point.
Yep. So we're reasonably content that I think we know where we are on that, and you know, it'll either be in a statement of common ground, or it'll literally just be us setting out what we consider to be the position for you. And the other outstanding matter is obviously the response to the Gypsy and Traveller assessment. And again, the expectation is that you will have all that information by Christmas. So hopefully you will have everything that you need in order to reach a view in January. I think those are the two outstanding matters now, aren't they, Mr. Smith?
Yes, they are, and obviously in presenting this table of mods, we've tried to split those out into the kind of three areas. So the first table with the significant majority of mods are the areas where we think you have everything you need. Then the second table relates to those outstanding matters for Luton and Gypsies and Travellers, and the third is relating to matters where we'll have the sessions on February 1st and 2nd.
Yeah. Have I frozen?
Yeah.
Have I frozen again?
Not for quite such a long time this time, but you did freeze for a little bit. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yeah. When I freeze, you from on my screen you also freeze as well. Yeah. And sometimes I can still hear what's being said, but sometimes I can't. So it's a little bit hit and miss.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, perhaps we should have, you know, a larger attendance. So I heard the information that I've asked for. Can you hear me now?
We can now, yes. Oh dear.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, this is rather frustrating.
Yeah.
Shall we just plough on and try and make the best of it?
Yes, whatever you feel most comfortable with, sir.
Well, right now I'm feeling rather frustrated, but
yeah, of course, it's very stressful. I know.
Okay, so what I did here then was the Gypsy and Traveller information, so I would also have that before Christmas. Yeah, just on the, I know it's Luton specific point. Yeah, I mean, if I can't have a statement of common ground before the very beginning of January, then a statement would assist. But ultimately, I think it's reasonably important that is common ground. I mean, I think it's only sort of factual information by and large that I was looking for in there in terms of the supply, wasn't it?
That's right, sir. I think it may be that that the information is simply just not available that you need from Luton, and therefore it's a question of what one does with what is available. I mean, I don't think there's any issue with us between ourselves and Luton. It's simply a question of what extra information we can give you, or what Luton can give you. And
okay.
Because as I understand it, they haven't yet produced their sort of annual monitoring documentation for the period to April 2019. And it's not likely to be anytime soon, I think.
Right.
So you know, it's not that there's conflict or anything. It's literally just an absence of information at the moment.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll see where that goes. See where that goes. All right. Okay. In terms of how we go forward, then, do you have any other sort of issues that you wanted to raise with me? I mean, I think hopefully at least we've done the really critical ones in terms of.
I don't think so. I mean, I think we know how we're going to present the further modifications. Hopefully, we know how we're going to help you so that you've got a clear copy of the submitted plan and all the modifications. We've covered the documentation that that's outstanding that we're going to give to you, and we're going to have the indication that we need by the end of January. So those are the key on the big points. So I think that's the key stuff as far as we're concerned. We've got the dates fixed for the two additional hearings.
One thing that just occurs to me, and I would beg and implore. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm getting another.
Oh, you can't hear you now.
Can you hear me now?
Can, yeah.
Can you hear me now? Yeah. Okay. Yes. Please. In all of the versions of the main modification, well, the two versions of the main modifications, the one for me for my report and the one for consultation, please, can you keep the main modification numbers the same?
Yep.
I have had the situation before where the final set of main mods has come through to me entirely reordered with different numbers, and that is frankly an administrative nightmare to unravel when writing a report and cross-referencing with what comments people made about main modifications.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you just be more, if you would be more sensible than some.
We'll stick to the existing main modifications and numbering, and insofar as there is any double counting, we will try and reference that in the documentation, so you know that.
Yeah. Okay. That would be very helpful. Thank you. Okay. Well, if you don't have any, if there's nothing else sort of procedurally to sort out, yeah, I did want to ask, and the planning inspectorate is sort of asking as well, how you found using Zoom for the hearings, what your experience has been, whether you think it's worked well or what.
From my part, I think it's worked far better than I ever thought it would. So yeah, I think it's worked pretty well, bearing in mind the number of participants and the opportunity for potential chaos. I think it's worked extremely well. I suppose the only comment that perhaps you might want to make is that if the inspectorate want their inspectors to continue doing this, then they need to provide you with appropriate IT and bandwidth to facilitate you to do it, because the frustration has been with you more than when I say with you, it has been really on sometimes the system letting you down, in terms of your connection.
I will feed that back, and it's very odd because in fact I do have quite a good computer. I haven't had it, it's quite new, and I haven't had it very long, and I'm sitting in Temple Key House, and I've deliberately done that because of my internet, partly because of my internet connection at home.
Yeah, indeed. So it's nothing to do with your computer, it's to do with the internet facility in Temple Key House. That's I think what the problem is. So it's but it's just very frustrating for the particularly for the person who's suffering the IT issues, because it's something that's outside your control, and yet it's kind of down to you. So it's it's very frustrating. So you just might want to feed that back to the inspectorate, that they need to provide you with the tools to do the job.
I certainly will, and the as well, just on that. So the planning inspectorate has asked me, as it's asking all inspectors at the moment, to ask the local authorities where we've held virtual hearings like this, if they would be happy to circulate to participants, that's both yourselves and all participants in the hearings, a feedback form. It's a very sort of simple, a tick box form for people to sort of feedback their experiences of doing things virtually. Is that something that the council?
Mr. Smith, are you
Yes.
happy to do that?
Yes, I am.
In due course.
Yes, that is absolutely
This
fine.
this is from the planning inspectorate rather than myself. It's not a form that I've concocted or anything like that.
And that is fine. Understood. And yes, we're more than happy to fill that out, and presumably through Miss St John Howe, send it out to other participants if you wanted it to go to those others that have taken part.
Well, that's what the planning inspectorate is asking. I think you're about to lose me again. Can you still hear me?
Yes. Yes, and we'll confirm we're happy to do that.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Yes.
Can you hear me? You can hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, smashing. Right, is there anything else that we can usefully cover, or are we done?
Mr. Smith, is there anything else that you feel that we need to cover?
No, I think we're done at this stage. Obviously, yes, noting what you've said about giving us an indication by the end of January, I don't think there's sort of any merit in going through that list in detail unless there was anything in that list you wanted to highlight or you're able to highlight at this stage that you had any concern with.
No, I mean, like I say, I've had the opportunity, because it's coming, I was doing the hearings, so I've had the chance to look through it generally, but I haven't fine-tooth combed it to make sure there's nothing missing or anything like that. Yeah, I mean, just in terms of the main modifications process, obviously in the first instance, the drafting would be for the council, and then if I do have sort of minor issues in terms of specific wording or something like that, then I'd expect sort of in you can hear me.
You broke up at the end, but I think I know what you were going to say, and that we draft a modification in the first instance, and then like last time, if you have detailed feedback on the wording, you'll provide that through Miss St John Howe, and we can update as required to get a set that you're happy with.
And just so you know, sir.
Yes, that's the essence.
Yeah, and just so you know, I mean, the timing that we've got in our minds at the moment would be, assuming that it's it's all stations go, we would be looking to go out to consultation in February as soon as possible, because we don't want to get caught by any sort of hurdle or whatever that might arise in relation to elections. So we just want to get on with it, I think, really is the message.
Yes, understood.
Thank you.
Understood, and I share your desire to move the examination forward as quickly as possible, irrespective of direction. So,
thank you, sir. Thank you.
Okay, well, at risk of me losing my connection again, shall we, unless there is anything else, shall we draw this to a close?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, sir.
Yes, thank you.
Very good. In which case then, I make it 11:34. I'll adjourn the hearings to resume at a time yet decided on the 1st of February.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.